Billionaire CEO buys a young woman at an auction without knowing the pain hidden behind her eyes. She wasn't there by choice. She was there out of desperation, fighting to save her little daughter's life. What began as a cold contract would soon shock everyone and change their lives forever. The spotlight was blinding. Clara stood barefoot on the polished stage, the number 19 pinned to the strap of her dress. She tried not to look at the rows of men in dark suits, their faces half hidden in the glow of crystal chandeliers. The ballroom was so silent she could hear her own breath catch. Somewhere beyond these walls, New York buzzed with life. But here time had stopped. The auctioneer's voice echoed like a verdict. Lot 19. 1 year commitment, all expenses covered, compensation determined by final bid. Clara's fingers curled against her sides. This is for Sophia, she reminded herself. This is the only way left. 50,000. The first voice came from the left, casual as if ordering wine. 70. Another hand rose. The numbers climbed, each one sounding farther away. Clara's throat tightened. Every bid was a reminder of how far she had fallen. Just a year ago, she'd been standing in front of a classroom, teaching poetry, her daughter waiting at the gates with that little stuffed rabbit. Then came the layoffs, then the medical bills, then the notice taped to her door in red. She pushed the memory down. She could not cry here, not when her future, and Sophia's, was being priced like an antique vase. 100,000. The auctioneer nodded, scanning the room. 150. The crowd murmured, more interested now. Clara felt the eyes on her like invisible hands measuring her worth. The hem of her simple black dress brushed her knees. It was all she could afford, yet tonight it made her look fragile, almost breakable. The bids slowed. For a moment, she thought it was over, that she would be sold for far less than she had prayed. Her breath hitched. If the amount wasn't enough, she wouldn't save the apartment, wouldn't pay the debts, wouldn't keep Sophia. Then a voice cut through the room, deep, calm. Final? 1 million. The air shifted. Every head turned toward the back row. Clara followed their gaze and saw him, Ethan Graves. The name she had heard whispered even before tonight. Youngest tech CEO in the country, a man who could buy entire companies before breakfast. He sat with one elbow resting lazily on the chair, his face unreadable, as if this bid meant nothing. The auctioneer repeated the number, stunned, then brought down the hammer with a single, sharp crack. Sold. The sound made Clara flinch. Her life, bought and sealed in less than a minute. She was led off stage into a smaller lounge, her knees almost giving way. The world outside the ballroom was quieter, carpeted, lined with heavy curtains. A lawyer waited at a glass table with a neat stack of documents, and Ethan was there, standing near the window, a dark silhouette against the Manhattan skyline. When he finally turned, the light caught the angles of his face. Steel-gray eyes, jaw carved like stone, not a hint of triumph. "You'll receive the full amount in escrow," the lawyer said smoothly, "upon fulfillment of the agreement." Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. Ethan spoke then, his voice steady, precise. "You'll live under my care until the child is born. Afterward, you will be free. You and your daughter will never have to worry again." Clara's head snapped up. "My daughter?" she asked, startled. "I research everything before I invest," he said simply. He knew about Sophia. The thought burned hot and cold all at once. The lawyer waited. Clara thought of Sophia's thin arms, the eviction notice, the empty fridge. Her signature looked strangely small on the page, but it might as well have been written in blood. When she finally set the pen down, she felt the weight of invisible chains close around her wrists, chains made of ink, paper, and a promise she couldn't afford to break. Clara didn't sleep that night. By morning, she had packed Sophia's favorite books into a small box, kissed her daughter's forehead, and told her she would be away for work. Sophia's sleepy eyes had searched hers, looking for reassurance Clara barely had. "I'll be back soon," she whispered, holding her close until the driver knocked at the door. Then came the flight, Ethan's private jet gleaming on the runway, the hum of engines sounding almost too soft for what this journey meant. Clara stared out the window the entire trip, watching New York shrink behind them until clouds swallowed the world. Seattle was grey and wet when they landed, the sky heavy with rain. A black SUV waited at the edge of the tarmac, its windows tinted, its driver silent. They drove for an hour through winding roads until the city gave way to forested hills and a gated community with security cameras that tracked their every move. Beyond the gates, Ethan's estate appeared, a mansion of steel and glass rising against the mist, modern and severe, as though it had been carved straight out of the mountainside. Clara's breath caught. It was beautiful and cold, like something out of another life. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, walls of glass, furniture so minimalist it looked like art. The house smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Ethan walked ahead, speaking with the same calm precision as at the auction. "You'll have a medical checkup tomorrow, nutritionist appointments twice a week. Security will escort you when you leave the property." He handed her a folder. Schedules, non-disclosure agreements, lists of protocols. Clara nodded, though her mind buzzed. It felt less like entering a home and more like being inducted into a corporation where every hour of her life had already been decided. That night she found herself standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of her new room, staring at the bay lights below. The bed was enormous, covered in crisp white linen, and the closet was already filled with clothes in her size. It should have felt like safety. Instead, it felt like a cage lined with silk. She pressed her palm against the glass, thinking of Sophia, wondering if she was already asleep or if she was asking the babysitter when her mother would come home. Clara's chest ached with the effort of staying strong. She had promised her daughter this was temporary. She had to believe it herself. Ethan barely spoke during dinner. They sat across from each other at a table so long it seemed absurd for two people. He read something on his tablet, nodding occasionally to the housekeeper who brought courses. Clara pushed food around her plate, appetite gone. Once she caught Ethan glancing at her, and for a second something flickered in his expression. Not coldness, not command, but something else. Then it was gone, shuttered away like the rest of the house. Later, when the halls were quiet, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. Every tick of the clock was a reminder. She was no longer just Clara, the struggling mother from Brooklyn. She was a name on a contract, a deal sealed by a man who lived in a mansion that felt as distant as another planet. And somewhere inside her, fear and hope wrestled. Fear of what she had become, hope that one day she would leave this place not broken, but whole again. The rain had not stopped for days. Clara woke to the soft hiss of water sliding down the glass, the sound like a whisper reminding her she was far from home. Each morning began the same way. A knock at the door, a tray with breakfast, a note with the day's schedule in precise handwriting. Doctor's appointments, nutrition sessions, short supervised walks in the garden. Everything was controlled, monitored, predictable. The mansion ran like a machine, and Clara felt like just another moving part. At night, she would close her eyes and imagine Sophia's giggle, the smell of pancake batter on a Saturday morning. It kept her from forgetting why she was here, why she had agreed to this deal in the first place. She rarely saw Ethan during those first weeks. When she did, it was in passing. Him crossing the hall with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression unreadable, him arriving late, rain dripping from the shoulders of his coat, nodding briefly before disappearing upstairs. At dinner, they exchanged polite words, but nothing more. He never asked about her day, never smiled. Yet Clara couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, always aware of where she was, what she did. Once, she caught him glancing at the file a security guard carried, her medical results, she realized, before giving a curt nod. It was like living inside someone's chess game, waiting for a move she couldn't see coming. Then one evening, something changed. Clara had wandered into the West Wing by mistake, following the sound of faint music. She expected an empty room, but stopped short at the sight before her. Ethan sat near the fireplace, a guitar resting on his knee. His head was bowed, fingers coaxing a melody soft enough to almost be a secret. It was not the picture of the ruthless CEO the magazines painted. For a long moment, Clara just stood there, unseen, listening. There was something in the way he played, careful, almost reverent, that made her chest tighten. When he noticed her, his hand stilled, and the room went silent. "I didn't mean to intrude," Clara murmured, stepping back. "You're not intruding," he said quietly, and for the first time his voice lacked its usual edge. Later, over dinner, he surprised her again. He asked how she was adjusting. Just that, a simple question, but the first one directed at her, not at the contract. Clara hesitated, then told him the truth, that it felt strange that she missed her daughter every second of every day. Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on her face. When she fell silent, he said, "I grew up in this house. It was quiet then, too. My father believed quiet kept you disciplined. There was no warmth in his tone, just a statement of fact, but something about it revealed more than he seemed to intend." Clara caught a glimpse of a boy growing up in echoing halls, learning to keep his emotions locked away. It was the first crack in the ice. The next morning, Lena, Ethan's assistant, brought Clara tea and lingered to chat. She was one of the few people in the mansion who smiled easily. "You saw him play?" she asked when Clara mentioned the guitar. "That's rare. He doesn't share that part of himself with anyone." Clara looked surprised, and Lena shrugged. "His mother died when he was 12. His father, well, he raised Ethan to run an empire, not to be happy. After the funeral, Ethan stopped playing for years, only picked it up again last winter." Clara felt a strange tug in her chest at the thought. She had imagined Ethan as untouchable, unshakable. Now she saw a man still haunted by a childhood where silence was a lesson and love a scarce commodity. That night, Clara found herself in the music room again. Ethan was there, not playing this time, just sitting with a glass of scotch staring at the flames. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice low but not accusing. Clara considered lying, but instead said, "Because for a moment it felt human. This house can be so cold." Something flickered in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "I don't believe in love," he said, almost as if warning her. "But I respect honesty and courage. You have both." The words settled over her like an unexpected blanket, warm and heavy. That night, lying in bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and let herself wonder, if a man who claimed he did not believe in love could play music like that, what else might he be capable of? The thought was dangerous, but it refused to leave her. The first sign that something had shifted came in the form of a package. It was waiting for Clara after breakfast, wrapped in brown paper with no note. Inside were 3 beautifully bound children's books, vintage editions she recognized from her own childhood. When she opened the first page, she found a small inscription in Ethan's handwriting, "For Sophia, when you see her next." Clara traced the words with her finger, her chest tightening. It was the first time since signing the contract that Ethan had acknowledged her daughter with something other than a legal clause. She felt a rush of warmth she didn't want to admit, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with money or obligation. That evening, a storm rolled in from the bay. Wind rattled the windows and thunder shook the glass. A power surge cut through the mansion, plunging everything into darkness. For a moment, Clara stood in the hallway, heart pounding, until a soft glow appeared at the end of the corridor. Ethan stood there holding a lantern, his silhouette tall and steady against the pitch black. "Generator will take a few minutes," he said. "Come to the library. It's warmer there." Clara followed, her bare feet silent on the marble floor, her pulse loud in her ears. The library was lit only by the lantern and the fire he had coaxed to life. It felt almost like stepping out of time, just the two of them, the rain and the glow of flames dancing against the walls. They sat across from each other, the storm filling the silence. Ethan surprised her by asking about Sophia again, what she liked to read, what she wanted to be when she grew up. Clara found herself talking more than she meant to, describing bedtime stories, Sophia's habit of drawing stars on the corner of every notebook page. Ethan listened without distraction, no tablet in his hands, no phone on the table. It was the first time Clara felt he was truly present, not just a CEO making sure an investment stayed on track. When she fell quiet, he stared at the fire for a long moment and said, I took over the company at 23. There wasn't time for mistakes, or for anything that looked like weakness. His voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it, like glass under velvet. Hours passed before the lights came back on. Clara blinked at the sudden brightness, almost disappointed the moment was over. Something about the firelit room had felt like a world apart, a space where she was not just a contract, and he was not just a man bound by legacy. As she stood to leave, Ethan said, "You don't have to stay locked in your room every night. The house is big enough for 2 people." It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't a command either. Clara walked back to her room with the storm still howling outside. Her thoughts a tangle of fear and something dangerously close to anticipation. The following days carried a different rhythm. Ethan started appearing at breakfast, a rare event according to Lena. He asked her opinion about small things, a book on the table, the choice of tea, as though her presence in the house had begun to matter beyond the contract. Clara noticed other details she hadn't before. The way his shoulders eased when he came home from work and found the fire already lit, the way he lingered a moment longer when handing her something, as if reluctant to let go. It was subtle, but it was there. The sense of ice melting, of walls quietly lowering 1 brick at a time. One night Clara woke to another storm and found herself standing again in the library, unable to sleep. Ethan was there too, this time without surprise, as if he had known she would come. They talked for hours about music, about the cities he had visited, about books she used to teach. There were moments of silence, but they felt comfortable, charged rather than empty. At one point their hands brushed when they reached for the same log to place on the fire. Neither of them moved away right away. The moment passed, but it left something behind, something neither of them could easily ignore. When Clara returned to her room that night, she stood by the window until the first light of dawn broke over the bay. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and realized with a jolt that something had changed. The mansion no longer felt like a cage, not entirely. Somewhere between the storms, the fires, and the late-night conversations, she had stopped counting the days until her freedom. That frightened her more than anything. The house was unusually quiet that afternoon. Clara had finished her medical checkup early and wandered through the halls, letting her fingertips graze the polished wood panels. She was starting to know the mansion's sounds, the way the floor creaked near the library, the distant hum of the kitchen appliances, but today it all felt too still, too expectant. Passing by Ethan's study, she noticed the door ajar, something that never happened. For a moment she hesitated, then pushed it open just enough to peek inside. The desk was covered with papers, files neatly stacked, except for one folder lying open in the center. She recognized her own name printed across the top. She knew she shouldn't, but something pulled her forward. Her hands trembled as she flipped the first page. Inside was not just her medical file. There were photographs, credit reports, transcripts of conversations with her landlord. A chill ran through her. This was not routine background checking. This was surveillance. At the bottom of the stack, her breath caught, a photograph of Sophia taken at the park just 2 months ago. The date was stamped in red on the corner. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. Someone had been watching her child without her knowing. The sound of footsteps snapped her back to reality. She dropped the folder and backed away just as Ethan appeared in the doorway. He stopped when he saw her, his gaze shifting from her face to the open file. For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. "You went through my desk," he said at last, his voice low, controlled, too controlled. "You were watching my daughter," Clara shot back, her anger boiling over. "That's not protection, that's control." Something flickered in Ethan's expression, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "If someone was going to make a deal with me involving a child, I needed to know exactly what risks I was taking," he said. "I needed to know she was safe." Clara's throat tightened. "Safe from who? From me or from you?" For a moment, Ethan looked almost human, conflicted, not the cold man who had bought her freedom. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before answering. "From the world," he said finally. "From people who would use you. Use her. People like my father." The name landed heavy between them. Clara had never heard him mention his father in anything other than clipped tones. "I am not your father," she said softly, but her hands were still shaking. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the photo, Sophia's smile frozen on glossy paper, stamped and catalogued like evidence. She thought about packing her bags, about walking out no matter what the contract said, but then she remembered the storms, the nights in the library, the quiet moments when Ethan almost seemed to let her in. Was that all just an illusion? Or was this part of who he was? A man who couldn't trust anyone, who believed protection meant control. The questions twisted in her chest until dawn painted the sky grey. When she finally went downstairs, she found Ethan waiting in the conservatory, as if he had been there all night. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, and his expression unreadable. "You should know," he said quietly, "that the people I'm dealing with would have torn through your life whether I intervened or not. I just made sure I was the one holding the information, not them." Clara stared at him, searching for the man she thought she had begun to understand. "You can justify anything, can't you?" she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "When you've seen what I've seen, you learn justification is just another word for survival." Clara turned and left the room without answering. She didn't slam the door, but the soft click sounded louder than any shout. Her steps echoed through the hall, her heart pounding in her ears. For the first time since arriving, the mansion felt hostile again, every shadow too deep, every corridor too long. She found herself standing by Sophia's photograph in her room, running a thumb over the glass, whispering a promise that no one, not even Ethan, would cross that line again. The next morning, the mansion felt different, quieter, as if holding its breath. Clara didn't go to breakfast. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her suitcase, seriously considering leaving. She could almost hear Sophia's voice on the phone the night before. "When are you coming home, Mommy?" That memory was what finally pushed her to act, not to run, but to fight. She went downstairs with her chin high and asked Lena to summon Ethan. The assistant hesitated for a beat before nodding and disappearing toward the study. Clara's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. This time, she wouldn't be silent. When Ethan entered the room, his usual composure was there, but his eyes showed a trace of fatigue, or maybe regret. Clara didn't wait for him to speak. "I won't live in a place where my daughter is just a name in a file," she said. Her voice was steady, but her chest was tight. "If you want me to stay, there need to be boundaries. Sophia is off limits. No surveillance, no photos, no files." Ethan stood still, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Done," he said simply, surprising her. "And I'll arrange for you to visit her. Supervised, but as often as you need." The words landed like a lifeline. Clara exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders for the first time in days. The first visit happened 3 days later. A black car picked Clara up and drove her to the small house she had once called home. When the door opened and Sophia threw herself into her arms, Clara felt the world snap back into place. She held her daughter so tightly she could feel the girl's heartbeat against her own. Sophia chattered about school, about her friend Mia's new puppy, about a painting she had made. Clara tried to memorize every detail, the smell of Sophia's hair, the warmth of her laugh, knowing it would have to last until the next visit. Ethan didn't join them, but she saw the car parked at the corner of the street. She caught a glimpse of him watching, not intruding, just making sure they were safe. Later that evening, Clara found him by the window of the library, staring out at the mist rolling in from the bay. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "But you did." He glanced at her, then back at the view. "I needed to see you were okay, that she was okay." There was no arrogance in his tone, no coldness, only a quiet admission that felt strangely intimate. Clara sat down across from him. "She asked about you," she said softly. I didn't know what to tell her. Ethan's lips curved just slightly. "Tell her the truth," he said. "Tell her I'm a man trying to figure out what kind of father he wants to be." Something shifted that night. The next day, Ethan surprised her with a small package left outside her door. Inside was a collection of vintage children's books, The same ones Clara had read to Sophia when she was little, now beautifully restored. A note in Ethan's precise handwriting read, "For the nights you miss her. Maybe they can keep you company." Clara pressed the books to her chest, overcome by the gesture. The man who had once seemed only capable of control was showing her something else, care, maybe even tenderness. As days turned into weeks, Clara noticed subtle changes. Dinners became less formal, less like business meetings. Ethan asked about Sophia's schoolwork, about her favorite subjects, even laughed once when Clara recounted a story about her daughter's stubborn streak. There were still walls around him, but cracks were beginning to show, letting light in. Clara found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the moments when silence between them felt comfortable instead of heavy. One evening, after a long day of appointments, Clara found Ethan in the conservatory, sitting at the piano. He wasn't playing for anyone, just letting his fingers wander across the keys. The melody was soft, almost sad, but when he saw her, he didn't stop. Clara sat quietly, listening, until the last note faded. "I didn't know you played," she said. Ethan gave a small shrug. "My mother taught me, before she died." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a trace of something vulnerable. For the first time, Clara wondered if the man in front of her was capable of something more than duty, if he might one day choose her for who she was, not just for the contract that bound them. The invitation came unexpectedly. Clara found it on her nightstand one morning, written on Ethan's stationery in his precise, deliberate script. "Pack for 3 days, business trip, you're coming with me." Her first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't a partner, she reminded herself. She was part of a contract. But something inside her stirred. This was the first time Ethan had asked her to join him outside the mansion, outside the carefully controlled routine. She packed a small suitcase, wondering what kind of world she was about to step into. The plane ride was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The jet was sleek, quiet, and somehow warmer than she expected, with leather seats that smelled faintly of cedar. Ethan spent most of the flight reading documents, but there were moments when she caught him watching her, as if measuring her reactions to this new environment. When the plane descended over Seattle's skyline, Clara pressed her forehead to the window, catching sight of the glittering city lights reflected on the water. For the first time in months, she felt a flutter of excitement rather than fear. At the conference, Ethan was transformed. In the mansion, he was brooding, controlled. Here he was electric. Clara watched from the edge of the room as he commanded the attention of an entire ballroom. His voice steady as he unveiled a new technology that promised to change the way the world connected. People applauded, cameras flashed, and for a brief moment she saw him not as the man who held her future in a contract, but as someone who had earned his place through brilliance and relentless effort. When the event ended, Ethan crossed the room, ignoring the line of investors waiting to speak with him, and offered her his arm. The gesture was simple, but Clara felt the eyes of the entire room on them as she took it. The next day, Ethan surprised her again by cancelling the afternoon meetings and suggesting a walk through Discovery Park. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of pine and salt from the water. They walked in silence at first, the sound of gravel crunching underfoot. Then Ethan spoke, his tone uncharacteristically quiet. "Do you ever think about what happens after all this?" he asked. Clara stopped, startled by the question. "After the contract, you mean?" He nodded. "Yes, after the contract." For a long moment she didn't answer, afraid of the hope rising in her chest. "I think about it every day," she admitted finally. It was during that walk that it happened, small but monumental. As they reached a lookout point overlooking the Puget Sound, a gust of wind whipped across the bluff. Clara instinctively reached for the scarf around her neck, but before she could, Ethan caught it, steadying her. And then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, he didn't let go of her hand. For a heartbeat, Clara froze, but when he didn't pull away, she didn't either. They stood there, hand in hand, the city spread out in the distance below them, and something inside Clara shifted. This wasn't just a man fulfilling a business obligation anymore. That night, Clara lay awake in the hotel suite, staring at the ceiling. The gesture had been so small, yet it echoed in her mind. She thought about the quiet dinners, the way Ethan's voice softened when he asked about Sophia, the piano music drifting through the conservatory. Was she falling for him, or had she already fallen? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When they returned to the mansion, nothing outwardly had changed, the same gates, the same polished hallways, but Clara felt different. There was warmth in the way Ethan spoke to her now, an ease that hadn't been there before. At dinner, she caught him watching her again, not with calculation, but with something she couldn't quite name. And in that moment, Clara realized the unthinkable. She no longer wanted this arrangement to end the moment the contract was fulfilled. The morning after their return from Seattle, Clara found Ethan waiting for her in the dining room, papers spread across the table. For a moment, her stomach dropped. It looked like the day they had signed the contract. But when he looked up, there was no coldness in his eyes. "Sit," he said, his voice calm but serious. Clara took a seat, her pulse quickening. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, sliding the papers toward her. "This was meant to protect both of us. But somewhere along the way it started to feel like a cage. I'm changing that." One by one he crossed out clauses, the curfews, the surveillance protocols, the restrictions on contact with Sophia. Clara watched in stunned silence as he took a penknife and cut the final page in half, the clause that ended their agreement after the child was born. "You're free to leave whenever you want," he said finally, "but if you stay, I want it to be because you choose to." Clara swallowed hard, her fingers brushing the torn contract. Something inside her shifted. This wasn't a transaction anymore. This was an invitation. The biggest surprise came that afternoon. Ethan knocked on her door, holding a small box. Inside was a sleek, palm-sized robot, its lights blinking softly. "For Sophia," he said simply. "I'd like to meet her, if she'll let me." Clara blinked, unable to hide her shock. A week ago, Ethan wouldn't even allow Sophia's name to be spoken in the house. Now he was asking to meet her. When the day came, Clara's heart raced as she watched Sophia stand shyly in the doorway of the park cafe. Ethan crouched down so he was eye-level with the girl, held out the robot, and pressed a button. It rolled across the floor and spun in a little circle, making Sophia laugh. It was the first time Clara had ever seen Ethan smile without restraint. From that day forward, things changed quickly. Sophia began coming to the mansion on weekends, filling the halls with laughter. Meals became louder, warmer. Clara found herself standing next to Ethan at the kitchen island, laughing as they tried, and failed, to make pancakes from scratch, because Sophia insisted it would be more fun than the chef's perfect ones. These small domestic moments stitched themselves into Clara's heart, until the mansion no longer felt like a place she had been sent to. It felt like a home. One night after Sophia had gone to bed, Clara found Ethan in the conservatory again. The lights were low, the city glowing in the distance. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable at first, then softened. "I wanted to," he said simply. "I told myself this was about the company, about the trust fund. But it's not just that anymore." His voice was rough, like it cost him something to admit. "It's you. It's her. I don't know when it happened, but I don't just want an heir anymore. I want a life." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she had been waiting to hear those words. She stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the uncertainty in his eyes. "Then stop talking like this is still a business deal," she said softly, "because it doesn't feel like one anymore." For a long moment they just stood there, the air between them heavy with something new, something fragile. When Clara returned to her room that night, she couldn't stop smiling. The contract was gone. The rules were gone. For the first time since that night in the hotel ballroom, she wasn't just surviving. She was choosing this place, choosing him. The night started quietly, almost deceptively so. Clara felt the first sharp pangs and knew it was time. Ethan was there in an instant, his hands steady and sure, though his eyes betrayed his nerves. He guided her gently to the car, holding her hand as though letting go was impossible. The city lights blurred past the window, but inside the car there was only the hum of their shared anticipation, a quiet tension that neither dared to break with words. Clara gripped his hand tightly, feeling the warmth of him, the certainty that he would not let her face this alone. At the hospital, everything was a controlled whirlwind. Nurses moved swiftly, monitors beeped steadily, and Clara's breaths were loud in her ears. Ethan stayed by her side, whispering encouragement, holding ice packs, and brushing damp hair from her forehead. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was calm, grounding. "You're incredible," he murmured as she pushed again, grit and tears marking every moment. She clung to the sound of his voice, using it as an anchor amid the pain and fear. Hours passed like minutes, each contraction sharper than the last, each second a test of endurance, of courage. Finally, the moment came. A cry cut through the quiet hum of the hospital wing, and Clara sobbed with relief and awe. Ethan leaned close, brushing a kiss across her temple as the baby was placed in her arms. The tiny, perfect face stared up at her, and she felt a rush of love so profound it nearly stole her breath. Sophia's voice on the phone echoed in her mind. "Will I get to meet my brother or sister?" Now she knew the answer, and the thought made tears fall freely. Ethan stood by silently, watching. His usual control softened into wonder. For the first time, Clara saw him as more than a CEO, more than a man bound by legacy. She saw him as a father. After the birth, Ethan did something Clara had not expected. He took the remaining pages of the contract, crumpled them in his hands, and tossed them into the fireplace in her hospital suite. The edges curled into blackened ash, drifting slowly into the flames. "It's done," he said simply, a weight lifted from his tone. Clara pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the literal and figurative burn of their past obligations, leaving behind only possibility. No signatures, no clauses, no restrictions, only choice. The following week was a blur of joy, new routines, and tentative adjustments. Clara brought Sophia to meet her new sibling for the first time, and Ethan's protective gaze softened further as the children interacted, laughter filling the room. He showed Clara how he had arranged a nursery, and even attempted to program a small robot to entertain both kids, smiling at the chaotic success of their tiny family. Every glance, every touch, every shared smile carved a new rhythm into their lives, a rhythm dictated not by contracts, but by love, trust, and growing connection. On a clear evening, under the soft glow of the mansion's terrace lights, Ethan led Clara to the center of the courtyard. Their children slept nearby, the night calm around them. He took her hands in his, eyes searching hers with a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "I don't want this to end," he said, his voice raw, steady. "Not the family, not us. Marry me, Clara. Be my partner, not my contract. Be our family." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every struggle, every risk finally meet its reward. And so in that quiet, intimate night, the mansion felt alive for the first time. Clara, Ethan, Sophia, and their newborn were no longer bound by obligation. They were bound by choice, by love, and by the fragile, beautiful hope of a future they had built together. In the soft glow of Seattle's night, Clara realized that what had begun as a desperate agreement had grown into the greatest story of her life, a story of survival, courage, and finally of family. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and hit the like button. It really helps us bring you more emotional tales that will touch your heart.